Känner i hjärtat att lyssna på blodpropp. Men först så blev det att hjärtat mitt slutar slå. Så att liksom det var att det blev ett sånt tom rör i kroppen.
All right, I missed time, so we're gonna listen to it again. Hopefully no one's super sad.
I'm running low on serotonin. Chemical imbalance got me twisting things. Stabilized with medicine. There's no depth to these feelings. Dig deep, can't hide from the corners of my mind. I'm terrified of what's inside. I get intrusive thoughts like cutting my hands off, like jumping in front of a bus, like how do I make the stop when it feels like my therapist hates me? Please don't let me go crazy. Put me in a field with daisies, might not work, but I'll take a maybe. Been breaking daily, but only me can save me. So I'm capitulating, crying like a fucking baby. I don't wanna miss a bala, I don't wanna be cicada. I don't wanna be I'm running low on serotonin. Chemical imbalance got me twisting things. Stabilized with medicine. There's no depth to these feelings. Dig deep, can't hide from the corners of my mind. I'm terrified of what's inside. I get intrusive thoughts like burning my hair off, like hurting somebody I love. Like, does it ever really stop? When there's control, I lose it. Incredibly impulsive, so scared I'm gonna end up doing something stupid. But I try to contain it. Oh, it gets so draining. It's like my heart is failing. Every night I'm contemplating. My inner voice is saying tough, so I try to brush it off. Yeah, I try to brush it off. I'm running low on serotonin. Chemical imbalance got me twisting things. Stabilized with medicine. There's no depth to these feelings. Dig deep, can't hide from the corners of my mind. I'm terrified of what's inside.
Kan man känna i hjärtat att lyssna på blodpropp.
Alrighty, so I put my playlist on shuffle this morning, and that came through, and I had forgotten that song existed. And since we're talking about treatments for depression, I thought a song about serotonin and figuring out how to take your meds might be helpful. And so this is something that I think I'm going to try to do. No promises that I'll find a good one for every disorder we're going to cover, but if you all know of any songs that might be kind of talking about a specific disorder or topic, shoot me an email. Get us a little more pumped up for class, especially right after lunch, right? Tuesday I was like, oh, everybody's tired, including me. That's not great. So, alrighty, today we're gonna keep talking about mood disorders. We're gonna talk specifically about treatments for mood disorders. So we'll talk about the biological ones as well as the talk therapies. And honestly, they're most often used now in conjunction with each other. And that's actually, when you look at research, what's most effective typically. So mood disorders are, luckily, because they are so common, one of the things that responds very successfully to treatment. And around half of people with major depressive disorder receive treatment for mental health each year from a professional. And in addition, many other people in therapy experience some feelings of depression as part of another disorder. Thus, much of the therapy being done today, at least is taking depression or depressed mood into account. Again, because it's so common, it was really the starting off point for a lot of our modern therapies. So many of the therapies we're going to talk about were first developed to help people with depression and then adapted over time, and now they're applied to other disorders as well. So the fact that there are many treatments available can be both positive and negative, right? Positive because, you know, if one med or one type of therapy isn't working for you, you can get a different type. But it can also be negative because of the competition or potential competition among methods. And talking about ads for medication, you know, ads for medication in general are something you really only see in this state, or here in the US. And they can be good because the consumer knows what's out there and they can ask their doctor about it, but they can also be bad because we don't really see ads for therapy, which works just as well as meds, if not better. And people may over-pathologize or overdiagnose themselves and ask for medications they don't need and worry when they don't need to do so. So for example, I've lost it to time, but one of the things when I first taught this class when I was a grad student that I saw just flipping through a magazine was a advertisement for a medicine for bipolar, and it had like all the criteria for bipolar disorder, and essentially encourage you to self-diagnose, right? Like that could be potentially scary for something like this. All right, what's happening with my captions here? Try this again. Hey, there we go. Okay. All right, so we're going to start with depression and we'll get to bipolar disorder. So we're going to have both psychological or talk therapy treatments and then biological, which go beyond just medications. And again, there's a lot because there are so many different types of treatments that have been applied to depression because it's so common, unfortunately. And we'll start with psychodynamic therapy. We've talked about this a little bit before, but essentially what we're going to do now is integrate what we talked about when we talked about treatments and psychodynamic theory, and then the specific psychodynamic theory of depression. So believing that unipolar depression results from unconscious grief over a real or imagined loss. They believe that depression is also compounded by excessive dependence on other people. So psychodynamic therapists seek to bring these issues into consciousness and work with them. Psychodynamic therapists use the same basic procedures or techniques for all psychological disorders, and those are free association, having the person just sort of talk whatever comes off the top of their head. And then therapist interpretation of associations, dreams, resistance, transference, anything that comes up in therapy. Despite successful case reports, researchers have found that long-term psychodynamic or particularly traditional psychoanalytic treatment is only occasionally helpful in cases of depression. Two features may be particularly limiting. Depressed clients may be too passive or weary to fully participate in these free association discussions. And depressed clients may become discouraged and end treatment too early when the treatment isn't providing quick relief. Short-term approaches have performed better than traditional approaches. All right, and so I found the bad psychodynamic therapy clip. I was like, we gotta bring it back. And so I'm gonna play this for you guys, so you see a little bit of what it would look like. It's not perfect, but it's funny. David, if you don't mind.
This sometimes humorous reenactment of a psychoanalytic therapy session, based on an actual case, effectively shows the principles of free association, transference, resistance, and dream interpretation in action.
I really don't have much to talk about today. Nothing much has happened in the last 24 hours. Work today was boring. So I really don't have much of interest to talk about.
When you left here yesterday, you seemed kind of anxious about a date you had last night.
Oh, yes. I don't know why I forgot about that. The whole reason I came to analysis was to figure out what goes wrong every time I start dating a woman. Anyway, the date last night was pretty much a bust. I felt awkward and inept. I took her to a movie, but I couldn't enjoy the movie because the whole time I was wondering about whether or not she found me interesting. She didn't say anything to me, so I kept thinking that she didn't want to have anything to do with me. Anyway, an hour into the movie, she asked if we could go because she was feeling sick. So I took her home. I felt like a complete failure. Oh, that reminds me of a dream I had last night. I was sitting in a movie theater, but for some reason it was all lit up instead of dark. The name of the film was Crimes of the Heart, which I haven't actually seen in real life. A woman sitting behind me was giggling, so I turned around and looked at her. She kind of flirted with me, so I turned back immediately. Then I noticed a man sitting about 4 or 5 seats away from me in my row. And he looked like a real slob and was incredibly obnoxious. I noticed he was eating buttered popcorn in a messy, disgusting manner. I handed him a napkin. I don't know where I got a napkin from. But anyway, the man completely ignored me and just kept on eating. Then he noticed the woman sitting behind me, and they began to exchange flirtatious glances with each other. Finally, the man got up out of his seat and went and sat next to the woman behind me. They were giggling and carrying on and made it hard for me to hear the movie. Then an usher came up and told me that I was making too much noise and I should leave. I explained to him that it was the couple sitting behind me that was making all the noise, not me. But he didn't seem to believe me. He just kept telling me to leave. I argued with him, but he got increasingly threatening. It looked like he was going to bash me one any minute. Then I woke up.
As you think about the dream, what comes to mind?
That's free association.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is pretty obvious, I guess. I think about the movie that I went to last night. In both situations, I felt pretty uncomfortable. But my date really looked nothing like the woman in the dream. I can't really say the woman in the dream reminded me of anybody. I know she was wearing glasses. Oh, I just remembered something. She was holding a white rose in her hand. I know that sounds pretty bizarre to be sitting in a fully lit movie theater carrying a white rose.
Does the white rose bring anything particular to mind?
Oh, of course. The woman I took out last night was named Rose. But like I said, she really looked nothing like the woman in the dream. Besides, the woman in the dream was sitting behind me. Wait a minute, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say that you are sitting behind me, and therefore the woman in the dream must represent you. I really don't think so, though, because like I said, she really looked nothing like you. Besides, you don't wear glasses. The only other association I have to roses goes back to my childhood.
So he's gonna start rambling about his childhood, but you kind of see, again, goofy, but you saw some transference there. You saw you know, it's dream interpretation, things along those lines. So it gives you a little bit of an indication. And that's traditional psychoanalysis when they sit, the therapist sits behind you like that. The idea is supposed to be like a blank screen and you project onto the therapist. All right, so next we're going to touch on behavioral therapy. And this was developed by Peter Lewinson, whose theory tied a person's mood to their life rewards, which we talked about last class. And so, again, first developed this type of therapy for depression in the 70s. The idea was to reintroduce clients to pleasurable activities and events, often using a weekly schedule. Researchers showed that adding positive activities can actually improve your mood. They would also appropriately reinforce their depressive and non-depressive behaviors, and a lot of times this would mean sort of ignoring the depressive ones and praising when the client like go out and did something. And then they would often recruit family and friends to help to carry this work off beyond that hour a week with the therapist. This could be thought of as conditional positive regard as opposed to Rogers' unconditional positive regard, where you're only showing positive regard when the person sort of acts in the way you want them to. Another thing that they would focus on is social skills. Help that person build social skills. Those pleasurable activities with other people will go even better. Behavioral therapy can be done in a group therapy setting. But one important thing is that these are of limited help when you only apply one. Like if you only did the scheduling of activities, that's not going to fix someone's depression totally. But when you combine 2 or 3 of the techniques, as Lewinson had envisioned, depressive symptoms, especially mild symptoms, are reduced. It's worth noting that Lewinson himself has combined behavioral techniques with cognitive strategies, which we'll talk about in a couple slides. And so I have a quick video about behavioral activation.
Behavioral activation is a type of psychological therapy which can be used to treat depression. When people are depressed, they might find things that are important to them difficult to do. Behavioral activation helps people understand how their behaviors have changed and how this may relate to their mood, and it helps them restart or take up new activities which are meaningful to them. A therapist may support someone in this process in person, over the phone, or online. Together, they assess situations in which changing someone's behaviors might be useful. The therapy also involves scheduling activities and monitoring behaviors. By doing these things, someone can make important and meaningful connections with their world again, reducing the behaviors, thoughts, and feelings associated with depression. Find out more by reading the review of behavioral activation.
So again, one piece of modern therapy, but a very important one. These are the stages of change within behavioral therapy. So the first thing you do as a therapist is you state the problem in behavioral terms. One of the reasons why this person is depressed is they're not engaging in any enjoyable activities. Then you identify behavioral objectives, especially whether you want the behavior to increase or decrease. So in this particular case, you'd want the depressive behavior to decrease and those enjoyable activities to increase. You'll develop measures and take baseline measures. So you'll have someone just fill out a schedule of what their week looks like without telling them to do anything. Now, the interesting thing about this that might not surprise you all is that when you tell someone to just start logging what they're doing for a whole week, they start to notice if they're not doing much. And so sometimes they'll actually start to change their behavior without you telling them to. And that's okay. That's effective in and of itself. You need to be, and we call that the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. So in physics, it means you can't know where an electron is and how fast it's going at the same time. But in psychology, it essentially means you can't study something without change again. So as soon as someone knows they're being observed, even if they're observing themselves, they're going to start changing their behavior many a time. You're going to modify the existing contingencies. It's probably pretty reinforcing to just stay in bed, right? We've all been there. We've all had those days. So think about helping them to figure out that getting up and going out and doing these social things can be reinforcing. And then monitor the results by changing the rate of responses. And then building on that, we have cognitive therapy. So Aaron Beck was a psychiatrist who developed cognitive therapy to help those with depression. And again, he started specifically with depression, and it's been branched out to a whole host of different disorders now. And Beck viewed depression as resulting from a pattern of negative thinking that may be triggered by current upsetting situations. So maladaptive attitudes lead to that negative cognitive triad we mentioned previously. So negative views of yourself, the world, and the future. And that these biased views will combine with illogical thinking to produce these negative automatic thoughts, things we're just telling ourselves all the time, kind of beating ourselves up. Beck's cognitive therapy is designed to help clients recognize and change their negative cognitive processes. This approach follows 4 phases and usually lasts for fewer than 20 seconds. And if you're thinking like a session a week, that's 6 months or less. And the phases here, the first is increasing activities and elevating mood. Behavioral activation. This is lifted entirely from behavioral therapy. Beck acknowledges that. And this is why many people now call cognitive therapy cognitive behavioral therapy, because it does have this behavioral component. Then challenging automatic thoughts. You actually have people take a note when they notice they're telling themselves something negative throughout the week, and you start to challenge those thoughts. Then you start to drill down a little more of what is the negative thinking, what biases are these people having that are driving those automatic thoughts. And then you get down to those primary attitudes, which are sometimes called core beliefs. And you try to help the person change that. And these are really fundamental things. I'm unworthy of love. I'm bound to be alone. I'm not smart enough. Things along those lines. And you try to help the person change those. So over the past, since the 70s, whatever that is now, 5 decades, hundreds of studies have shown that cognitive therapy is really helpful for unipolar depression in particular. And about 60% of clients show near total elimination of symptoms. The others tend to have at least some remission. You can also, just like behavioral treatment, do this in a group setting. All right, so this is a brief video where Beck talks about how he developed cognitive therapy. He was trained as a psychoanalyst, kind of everyone who wanted to be a therapist at that point in time was. It was the only way to do therapy. And he'll talk a little bit about his shift.
And I was just wondering how long it took you to move from psychoanalytic to cognitive theory, how long that transition was.
How long did it take to make this switch?
Yeah.
Amazingly.
And so this is Aaron Beck, and then sitting next to him is his daughter, Judy Beck, who also is a psychologist and runs the Beck Center for Cognitive Therapy in Philadelphia.
It took a couple of years. Even though I've been trained in psychoanalysis and went through my personal psychoanalysis and analyzed a couple of people, and that stretched out over my psychoanalytic training, starting with my residency, probably stretched out over 12 years. It took 2 years to change it. And what changed it is once I more or less invalidated the theory of depression, I started to examine everything about psychoanalysis, and I realized that I had accepted everything on faith. I believed everything about psychoanalysis because it was taught by people whom I respected. And it did seem to have an answer for everything, too. But once I started looking for the empirical evidence, there was none. And then when I started looking at the logical framework, and I could go into a lot of detail about that, but such things as the presence of the unconscious, the way Freud said it, not the way we mean today when we talk about unconscious processes, nothing held up. So that collapsed, and within 2 years I was doing cognitive therapy, but without that label. And I had my first book, my first paper, the paper that I wrote on masochism and dreams, which was psychoanalytic interpretation of dreams. That was in 1959. And in 1961, I wrote my first paper on the cognitive model, and then that was not a well-known paper, but then in 63, then I wrote my much better-known paper, Thinking and Depression.
51 years ago.
At least.
So again, you
And
kind
I
of
was
see again, this is a challenge for anybody, right? It's sort of almost poetic for someone who goes about changing people's cognitions, right? To think about, well, yeah, I've always just sort of believed this because people who are smart taught me this, right? And one of the things I hope we teach you in the psych major is not to take things at face value, to look into the research, even stuff I'm telling you. It's entirely possible there's updated stuff in the past 6 months that I missed prepping for this class. So the next is a clip of him working with a client whose husband has left her.
But first, what we want to do is look at.
So just much younger Aaron Beck. And he used to rock this bow tie, and I would say well into his 70s. I would see him at the conference I go to each November, just like power walking around. Just like, where do you get all your energy, man?
Exactly what you have lost. Now that the worst has happened, you're afraid that David was going to leave you, and he has left you.
David was her husband.
And you feel as though there's been such a terrible loss, it's like a guillotine coming down on you. So let's see, in actuality, what you have lost in losing David.
I lost my best friend in the whole world.
Okay. You lost your best friend. What else?
I lost something to talk to about all my feelings and thoughts. Although half the time he didn't want to listen to them, but he still listens sometimes.
Well, half the time you did not even listen.
No, we just walk out of the room. You know that, we've been through that before.
Right. What else have you lost?
Well, I'm not sure yet in terms of, I don't know, financial support, moral support. I've lost the father of my children. I'm scared for my children not having a father now. I've read about what happens to kids when their parents split up, and I've lost that. I've lost my security. You know,
And just like quick note, modern research actually shows, particularly if the marriage is contentious, it's actually beneficial for the children if their parents split up.
I haven't been out working for years, and I don't know what I'm gonna do. David's being such a bastard about money now. Like he makes a lot of money, but I think he's trying to work it out that I just get some sort of minimum thing. I don't know what he's doing. Well, I haven't gotten anything from him since he left, and it's been a month now. And I'm really worried about money. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I don't have any income. I've got 2 kids.
Well, what is the thing that hurts you the most? Is it the money?
No. It's losing him.
Now, do you think the loss of David is hurting more because of the symbolic meaning of the loss, or for what's been taken away from you?
I don't know which is more. It's probably both. Maybe it's more symbolic. I don't know. Maybe it's more all my hopes that everything was going to work out, that I've, maybe it's losing my hope because I just kept hoping it would be okay. So maybe it is more symbolic than real. But it's still pretty depressing when you don't have any more hope, you know?
Well, it depends upon what your hopes are for.
Well, I hoped it was going to work out okay with us.
Right? So that's one hope that vanished. But aren't there other hopes that can come in and take their places?
I guess I'm not letting them come in.
You're not letting any hopes come in. In other words, when you look to the future, you're not even trying to think of ways in which losing David can be compensated for.
So that's that negative view of the future that's part of the cognitive triad.
Who would want me? Sorry.
That's all right.
And so there is another part to that I couldn't find on YouTube, but where you see Beck starting to talk to her about some of these thoughts. And one of the things he says is like, to get her to talk more about the symbolic loss, like how would you have felt if David like went to war and died? Would you feel better or worse? And she kind of says like better because then he's not choosing to leave us. And she talks more about like expecting her marriage to last. And this is one of the parts that usually shocks people, because people think that cognitive therapy is like teaching people to think like happy, shiny thoughts, but it's not. It's teaching them to think realistically. And Beck actually says to her, is that a realistic expectation that your marriage would last, given that the divorce rate is 50%? And people are like, what? But it's about realism. This is an example of what that activity scheduling might look like. You actually have people just initially the first week write down what they're doing. And then in subsequent weeks, you'll have them do things like scheduling going to the museum, scheduling calling a friend, scheduling things that are enjoyable and get them out of the house or get them talking to other folks. This is what's called a thought record. And this is an expanded version of the ABC sheet we did on the board earlier in the semester, where you have clients write down their negative automatic thoughts, the situation where those thoughts arose, and then what would be a rational response to that thought. So getting them to argue with themselves about it. And so you'll get them to do things like, what would you say to a friend who said that about themselves? You know, what is the most likely thing to happen? What is the worst thing that could happen? And could you survive it? Things along those lines. And this is the full theory. The idea is that some early experiences we have may lead to the formation of these dysfunctional assumptions and beliefs. Other critical incidents throughout our lives. So in this case, this woman, you know, having her husband leave her. Those are going to activate those assumptions and beliefs that we developed early on. That's where we get the negative automatic thoughts. And those interplay with all the symptoms of depression: behavioral, thoughts, feelings, physical, and motivation or lack thereof. So in cognitive therapy, you're trying to help the client become aware of what they're thinking. Help them to recognize their own cognitive distortions. Help them to recognize where those are coming from, and start to substitute more rational or accurate thoughts. And the client gets feedback from others as to whether those changes are correct, quote unquote, they're reinforced. There's cognitive restructuring, some of the questions I was just asking. What's the evidence for that? What's the evidence against that? What's another way of looking at it? So what if that happened? Would you survive it? Using the as if method. We said it's called this fake it till you make it. And the idea is have the courage to do something imperfectly. Go out and act as if you're not depressed. What would you do if you weren't depressed? So interpersonal theory, IPT, begets, I don't know how to translate that verb. spawns, that's worse, interpersonal therapy. So this model holds that interpersonal problems may lead to depression, and those have to be addressed in order to help someone with their depression. So interpersonal loss, very similar to what we saw Beck just talking about, very similar to what psychodynamic therapy talks about. The loss of an important loved one, and this could be symbolic or real. So you would explore the relationship, help them express feelings of anger, and develop new ways of thinking about that loss. Interpersonal role dispute is where two people have different expectations of a relationship and the role they play in it. And I have to say, when people hear relationship, they tend to think romantic relationship, but this could be like relationship with your family of origin, relationship with a friend, or a sibling as well. So you try to help them examine and resolve those disputes, empower them to do so. Interpersonal role transition are major life changes. You've just given birth to a new baby, you've just gotten married, things along those lines. So these folks often feel overwhelmed, and you try to help them find social support and the skills that their new role requires. This could also include things like new promotion at work or a new career field altogether. And then interpersonal deficits include things like extreme shyness or awkwardness. So here is where you would preach social skills training and assertiveness, and you just help them recognize those deficits as well. Studies suggest that interpersonal therapy is as effective as cognitive therapy for treating depression. So the role, the therapy that people choose may have to do just with what resonates with them more, or what's going on with them. Or honestly, who's available in their area who takes their insurance, realistically, right? All right, so this is a quick video of someone doing IPT for depression.
You mentioned before that you had felt closer to your daughter at one time than you do now.
Yes, before we moved to Canada, we were close. But now we seem to, I don't know why, I just seem to get so angry with her. And I feel she does not honor me as her mother.
So there's something about this transition that's been very difficult in your relationship with your daughter. She's moved from one of these inner circles to this more distant one. And I can see as you're speaking of her that this is quite painful for you.
I love my daughter, but things seem to be different since we have been here.
What you've described about your daughter being out here, even though you would like her to be closer, that's exactly the focus of the work that we'll be doing together. We'll be looking at those important relationships and finding ways to bring those people closer to you.
IPT really focuses on the centrality of relationships and universal problems related to loss, change, and conflict. It's rooted in interpersonal theories that are clinically helpful, and there's a strong body of research that has shown it to be a highly powerful and effective treatment for clinical depression in the context of life events.
So I like that because you get to see a little bit of what it might look like working with a client in these scenarios. If relationship disputes, marital issues, family issues are the primary thing driving the depression, then couples or family therapy can be the most helpful form of treatment. And the main type of couple therapy used here is behavioral marriage therapy. And the focus here is on developing specific communication and problem-solving skills. So I was actually trained in this as a grad student. And one of the most important skills, for example, you teach to people is reflective listening, where you make them listen to their partners and reflect back what their partner said. And that's really hard for people to do because everyone wants to argue rather than listen. And if the marriage or relationship in general is conflictual, then behavioral marriage therapy is as effective as other therapies for reducing depression. Only issue with couples therapy is you've got to get both people to agree to come in and be part of the process, right? And that can be a challenge. All right, so next we're going to start talking about some of the biological treatments for depression. And we're going to start with one of the more extreme, and that's ECT, or electroconvulsive therapy. Now, even though I'm starting with this in our description of biological treatments, this would never be your first line treatment. This is certainly something that you would try therapy, you would try medication before you would get to this. And that's because you're literally applying electricity to the brain. So we don't want to just like jump into doing this. So you apply brief electrical current to the brain, and that results in temporary seizures. And usually 6 to 10 treatments are required. And it's effective in cases of severe depression. Again, you're not going to give this to someone who comes in with like a mild or moderate case of depression. The side effects are few. However, memory loss is a possibility. I actually did neuropsychological testing on someone who did have memory loss from ECT when I was in grad school, so it can happen. There's even a Broadway musical that was out 10 years ago, maybe. It was called Next to Normal, and one of the plot points is that the main character underwent ECT and they made it like she lost all her memory. Probably not that extreme, but sort of illustrating that symptom. We don't know why it works. The best analogy we seem to have is it's like when you call tech support and they say, have you tried turning your computer off and turning it back on? It kind of seems to like jumpstart the brain, but it does work. However, relapse is common. The discovery of the effectiveness of ECT was accidental, and it was based on a fake idea people had. They didn't know it was fake, but this wrong theory people had that there was a link between psychosis and epilepsy. The procedure has been modified in recent years to reduce some of the negative effects. So, for example, they used to just let patients have full-on seizures. And now they'll do things like give them muscle relaxants and anesthetics before and during the procedure. This helps eliminate things like, pulling your shoulder out of joint while you're convulsing. Patients generally do report, again, some memory loss, although usually not severe. And ECT is clearly effective as a sort of last resort for unipolar depression. So we do see improvement in about 60 to 80% of clients. It seems to be particularly effective in cases of severe depression with delusions in particular. So those depressive episodes with psychotic features we talked about. But again, no one knows why. It kind of boggles my mind that like in the year of our Lord 2023, we're still using treatments that we don't understand why they work, but they work. So although effective, the use of ECT has declined because of the memory loss, the frightening nature of the procedure, and the emergence of more and more effective antidepressant medications. So I have a brief video that shows what modern ECT looks like. So heads up to anyone who has any kind of medical squeamishness.
I was diagnosed with catatonia. I was delirious, confused, regression, dementia.
So she's going to talk about catatonia. One thing that I did not say is that ECT is also effective for psychosis. So someone who has schizophrenia, and you could have catatonia in the context of schizophrenia, in the context of depression, like we talked about previously.
I didn't know what was going on. We had tried everything else, meds, therapy, chiropractic work, ketamine treatments, and nothing was working. So finally.
So she's the ideal candidate for ECT. She's gone through a whole bunch of other things first. And yes, ketamine is something that we're trying to treat depression now. along with microdosing on psychedelics. So there you go. We're trying everything.
We ended up deciding to try ECT.
ECT is a procedure that was first developed in the 1930s and has been refined over many decades to reduce side effects and to improve outcomes. It's used for depression, bipolar illness, psychosis, and catatonia. We're inducing a very brief seizure under general anesthesia to affect brain changes that will help depression and other illnesses.
Stigma is a problem where ECT is concerned. However, there is a big mismatch between reality and the basis of the stigma. So the reality is that ECT is painless, it's quick, it's highly effective, and it can be life-saving in many instances.
ECT has changed George's life. He was unfunctioning completely. He would cry and hit himself in the head for hours and hours straight, and nothing you could do would help him. You just couldn't console him. So it was a horrific time period for both of us, because as a mother, not being able to help your child who you are watching suffer and deteriorate before your eyes, it was horrible for both of us. The ECT clinic is amazing. The people here are some of the most caring people you can ever meet. Coming to ECT has become almost like a safe place for George. He knows he's going to feel better, and I believe that he knows he's being very well taken care of.
If you were a patient coming in to do ECT, this is what your day would look like. They check in, the nurse does the intake, an IV is set up, they get wheeled into an OR where they receive ECT. They are taken care by a team from anesthesiology and psychiatry. Your IV is already set up, so in rapid succession receive light and very quick acting anesthesia. At that point, the psychiatrist along with their team will induce a seizure. There is a set of paddles which are placed either on two sides of your head, or they might be placed on one side of your head. Those are the two common placements known as bilateral and unilateral. Your seizure takes about 30 seconds to a minute or two. Once that's over, you slowly over minutes wake up. And I would say that it takes no more than about 5 to 7 minutes. They're assisted during their recovery. The whole procedure is over within a few minutes, and usually within 2 to 3 hours you're ready to go home.
So it's been about a year since.
So I just love that version of it because it shows you how mild it is now. It shows you how they make it very routine. And again, not something that we're doing first line, but something that we can try. Another not first line treatment that we've been doing lately, I mean, not personally, but the field, is vagus nerve stimulation. So the idea here is you're going to stimulate the brain electronically by stimulating the vagus nerve. So you have a pulse generator implanted under the side of your chest. It's kind of like a pacemaker, but for your brain. And people, as many as 40% of those who are treatment resistant, again, therapy hasn't been working, meds haven't been working, get relief here. Again, we're not exactly sure why, but this shows you. So here is the vagus nerve. Here is where the electrodes, where it can be stimulated, would be implanted. And then here is that pulse generator. So like a pacemaker, like anything else, you would have to carry a card so they know at the airport why the metal detector is going off, and you wouldn't want to get an MRI, for example. And again, brief video here. I tried to find lots of videos to illustrate these things because I think that's better than me just talking about it.
Feeling freedom from a gripping state of depression. This is what it's like. Nick Forney is now living his life on his own terms with his best friend and wife, Mary. They've been through the worst, the twists and turns of a long road, a journey taking them too many miles down the path of
Just someone who studied neuropsychology, these people should be wearing helmets. Just my side note, I couldn't let that slide.
Severe depression.
A lot of hatred, and that's how I felt. I hated everybody and everyone. You know, it was always being in a bad mood, down, nothing good. Even if I had everything that I wanted, it wouldn't make me happy.
We started dating in high school. So in the beginning, you don't really know what it is. And there's a lot of acting out and drinking and things like that, because you really don't, his description of it is, I don't fit. Can't figure out, I don't fit.
Nick explains there was only one real escape.
It was like every day was 2 days. Every day was 48 hours long. There was no relief from it. The only time I'd get relief from it is when I'd sleep. So, and my wife, she'd always let me sleep. I'd sleep during the day and at night.
Then one day, he realized.
That's that hypersomnia that we mentioned, sleeping all the time.
I was out here mowing the yard, and I'm like, if this is all there is, I'm tired of it already.
That long road they were on for many years took another turn. That's when Forney made his way through to the brighter side of life.
Oh, it's awesome. I mean, wonderful. I mean, we enjoy every day together, and I enjoy life.
What finally worked wasn't the things he added to his life, like the motorcycle or boat, and it wasn't a pill. In fact, Nick said the medications didn't do the job, sometimes making things worse.
I had some bad interactions on meds. I had some mind-altering things happen that were just horrible. She could tell the second, looking in my eyes, she could tell if drugs were failing.
Mary's
So that's looks like any other medication. Some people are like allergic to certain classes of antibiotics. Certain medications that are psychotropic will work for some people, and other people will have bad reactions to them.
unwavering support led them down a road less traveled, finding the courage to try something new. Nerve stimulation from this implanted device, the vagus nerve stimulator.
What this vagus nerve stimulator did for him, it was like, oh wow. It really was like a miracle.
The stimulator is attached to the vagus nerve, which originates in the brain, passing through the neck and into the chest and abdomen.
It's right there.
Yeah, it's right there.
Right.
It's right there. And then, yeah, you can feel it. And then it goes.
The device sends regular, mild pulses of electrical energy to the brain. It was designed to treat epilepsy, but is also FDA approved for treatment-resistant depression.
The pathway of the vagus nerve into the brain targets many of the regions that are involved in mood. The studies that we were involved in actually showed that over many months of stimulation, you actually see changes in the activity of these regions. You could kind of think of this as a pacemaker for the brain, where it's consistently delivering stimulus, and the brain eventually has to do something with that. And in the process of adapting to this stimulation, it brings about a change in the depression.
Nick became part of a study led by Dr.
So it's still a little, I think they're still probably doing a lot of studies on it. So it's still a little experimental, but it is FDA approved. So, yet another thing for people who these other treatments don't work for. Another less invasive method is transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS. And this stimulates the brain without the undesired effects of ECT. And it's been found to reduce depression when administered daily for 2 to 4 weeks. And I have a video of this I'll show after this slide. And then deep brain stimulation goes along with the theory that there might be a depression switch located deep within the brain. And so researchers have successfully experimented with electrode implantation, not on the nerve, but directly in the brain, in an area called Brodmann Area 25. While there are positive initial findings and they've produced considerable enthusiasm in the clinical field, it's important to recognize and remember that in the past, certain promising interventions like lobotomies later proved problematic and even dangerous. So if you're not familiar with what a lobotomy is, it's gross. So heads up for this, if anyone's squeamish. They used to go in either through the nose or through the eye socket, with essentially an ice pick. In fact, the first lobotomies were done with an ice pick. They sterilized it, I hope. And basically mash up your prefrontal cortex. So like, yeah, you would be controllable and you wouldn't like cause a ruckus, but it would also like take away your personality and your emotions and things like that. Shutter Island with Leonardo DiCaprio is a movie that shows some of that. All right, so here is a brief video about TMS.
Before treatment, I was in depression to where I didn't get up. I didn't move out of my bed. I stayed there all day. I just stare at the ceiling. So I tried all the different types of therapies. I tried all the different kinds of medications, alternative therapies. I didn't like the side effects. I didn't like waiting to see if something was going to happen, and then it didn't. So
one of the things that's not as well known is like when you get it on an antidepressant, it might take 2 to 6 weeks to see whether it's working or not. That's a long time when you're feeling as badly as people who are severely depressed feel.
Constantly let down. Now with TMS, for me, I didn't have side effects. When I started feeling better, I didn't know if it was me actually feeling better or if it was that I wanted to feel better. So it took about 2 weeks before I realized that this wasn't a feeling that was going away. The treatment that I received was absolutely simple. They just put something against my forehead and it took 3 minutes.
So this big black thing that you can't see now, there we go, it is just a big magnet and it's sending magnetic stimulation into the brain.
TMS stands for transcranial magnetic stimulation. It's also referred to as repetitive, or RTMS, which is repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation. And the machine uses a magnetic field to generate activity in neurons, something known as action potential. And so the idea is that we're promoting a process known as neuroplasticity, which is the synchronization of neurons, getting them to fire more actively over time. And when neurons fire together over time, they tend to fire in healthier ways, which is thought to be related to the therapeutic results. There are different trajectories of treatment. Sometimes people respond quickly and sometimes people take a longer response. And then sometimes there's response, which is about a 50% improvement in symptoms, and there's what's called remission, where people are no longer depressed. So Teresa both responded quickly and had a full remission of her symptoms.
I have my life back. I look forward to things. I take care of my family. I'm productive. For me, this has been the most life-changing thing that has ever happened to me because I lived with depression.
So, as you could see that you just go in, you're sitting in a chair, they put this magnet on you, they send some waves through you, so nothing invasive. Now, there are many different kinds of antidepressant drugs, and we'll discuss each in much more detail. The MAOIs, or monoamine oxidase inhibitors, they really focus on MAO, this enzyme that breaks down serotonin and norepinephrine in the brain. And so MAO inhibitors block that enzyme and basically make it so not as much serotonin and norepinephrine is broken down. So you have more net serotonin and norepinephrine in your brain. Based on what we talked about with the biological theories, right? That means that you're going to have better outcomes because more serotonin, more norepinephrine flowing around, that might reduce your depression. These are slightly more effective than the next type we're going to talk about, tricyclics. The one thing that makes these untenable for some people is that you have to avoid foods containing something called tyramine, and that includes beer, red wine, and the one that would be worse for me, cheese. If I couldn't eat cheese, I'd be very, very sad. All right, tricyclic antidepressant medication are still widely used, although not as much as in the past. These are things like Elavil and Tofranil, and these will block the reuptake of norepinephrine and other neurotransmitters. And I have in a couple slides, I have a diagram to explain what the heck that means. And it takes 2 to 8 weeks for the effects to be known, as I just mentioned, so it can be a while. Negative side effects are common, including weight gain. And the problem with tricyclics is you can overdose on them. And when you overdose on them, you can die. So Marsha Linehan, who we'll talk about next week when we talk about suicide prevention, she is a very well-known therapist and psychological researcher, and she has a saying, no lethal drugs for lethal patients, right? So someone that you know has suicidal ideation, you wouldn't want to put them on this. So instead, what is really the first line in this day and age is SSRIs. So these specifically block the reuptake of serotonin, and that's what SSRI means. Specific serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And these include things like fluoxetine or Prozac, but they also include things like Lexapro and a lot of the other really famous antidepressants. I was going to say Flonase, but that's a nasal spray. It's not this. I was thinking of fluoxetine. They pose no unique risk of suicide and violence. It'd be very difficult to overdose on them. There are some negative side effects. Some people will talk about feeling like a little brain foggy, things along those lines, but they're certainly not as severe as the other medications. All right, so here's that diagram I promised to show what reuptake inhibition means. So this is the transmitting neuron. So the message has come down the axon and it is transmitted across the synapse, this barrier between the little gap between the two neurons, using a neurotransmitter. So they're using serotonin and norepinephrine to show. So the sending neuron will spit out, release serotonin and norepinephrine. And then the receiving neuron has receptors. It gets those receptors, it has enough of them, it tells that neuron, the receiving neuron, to also fire, send that message down. Now, the problem we could see in people with depression is they might have lower levels of that serotonin and norepinephrine. So only a little bit is attaching, it might not get that neuron to fire. So what reuptake inhibitors, whether they're tricyclics or they're SSRIs do, is they basically, oh, and then what happens at the end, sorry, that's what called is that, so not to waste the serotonin and norepinephrine, anything that doesn't connect to the receiving neuron is like sucked back up like a vacuum. And so what these inhibitory antidepressants do is they basically clog the vacuum. They make it so the vacuum can't suck it back up as much. So the norepinephrine and serotonin stay in the synapse longer. They're much more likely to attach to the receiving neuron and get the receiving neuron to fire. So it just, it's kind of uses what your body already has, but gets it to be more efficient with them. I used to try to draw this or like use my hands, so I was really happy when I found this diagram. It's a lot easier for y'all to understand. So just to give you all an example of how many different medications there are so many, which is great because let's say one SSRI doesn't work for you, you can take another one. So some of the other names you might recognize, anafranil, we talked about Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, Wellbutrin is a well-known one, Celexa, Lexapro. I think Pristiq is the one where they just took one of the existing SSRIs and dyed it pink when the patent was about to run out. And it was like, it's for PMDD. I'm not even joking, that happens. Some people also turn to alternative therapies. You heard a couple people mention that in the videos we watched today, right? Chiropractic, things along those lines. Like basically people will try anything. And there are some natural remedies that can be helpful, particularly for depression. And so 34%, so about a third of Americans will seek unconventional treatment during any given year. And about 15% of those, so 15% of the 34%, reported using alternate treatments for mental or emotional issues. So why do people use these? Well, back in the day, and I mean like back in prehistory, right? These were the only type of medication available. They would find herbs that made people feel better, and they would use those. People believe they work. And if we think about the placebo effect, right? If you think something works, you're gonna feel better. Financial reasons. So some people might not have insurance. It'd be way too expensive to them to go to therapy or to get SSRIs, although there are SSRIs on like the Walmart $10 list, which is good. So they might choose it for that reason. And then what we see is dissatisfaction with conventional medicine. Our system unfortunately fails people, and particularly with mental health issues. If you go to say your primary care doc and they're not very mental health oriented, we may see people just dismissed, dramatically gaslit. Oh, it's all in your head. Yeah, that's the point. I need help, right? And so they might turn to this instead, or maybe they've tried treatment, it's not working. So some of the ones in particular you may have heard of, St. John's wort. This was really popular in like the late 90s, early 2000s. So it is helpful in mild cases of depression, and it seems like it basically acts like an SSRI. Like it's blocking the reuptake of maybe serotonin, maybe norepinephrine. And then valerian is a mild sedative, anxiolytic, and antidepressant, and it seems like it acts more on GABA. So it's possible that these natural remedies are doing what prescription medications are doing. Now, in terms of comparing the treatments, for most kinds of psychological disorders we'll see throughout the semester, there aren't as many available. Anxiety disorders that we'll talk about next also have a lot of options, but when we get to things like eating disorders, schizophrenia, sometimes there are only 1 or 2 treatments that work well. That's obviously not the case with depression, where you have a lot of different approaches that you can use. Findings from a number of different research studies suggest that cognitive, interpersonal, and biological therapies are highly effective for the whole range, mild to severe depression. Cognitive and interpersonal therapies have lower likelihood of relapse. That's because in those therapies you learn skills that you can keep applying even when you're done with therapy. When you go off meds, you go off meds. However, they are not remission proof. Certainly people can still go into remission. Couples therapy, again, tends to be helpful, particularly in cases where the people with unipolar depression experience significant marital discord. Strictly behavioral therapy is less helpful. Incorporating it into these other modern therapies is helpful. Psychodynamic therapies are less effective than the other therapies, although the short-term versions work better than long-term traditional psychoanalysis. And a combination of therapy and medication is modestly more helpful than either of those alone. And sort of what they think happens is basically, as you're waiting for the medication to kick in, the therapy gives you support. And if you're doing something like behavioral activation, starts to get you kicked into gear. Then when your medication kicks in, you can engage with therapy. And among biological treatments, antidepressants and ECT seem to be equally effective. ECT tends to work more quickly. I would guess it's similar for the other modern methods like TMS or vagus nerve stimulation. In addition, the newly developed brain stimulation treatments seem helpful for some severely depressed individuals unresponsive to other things. All right, so now we're going to talk about bipolar disorder, and here's an example of a disorder where there aren't as many treatments available, even though it's obviously very closely related to depressive disorders. So here you go. It's basically lithium or other medications. So lithium is a common salt, and it's the primary drug of choice for bipolar disorder, although there are other modern mood stabilizers. Unfortunately, the side effects can be very severe. You can actually get lithium poisoning, and so you need to be very closely monitored when you're on lithium. And the dosage, it's like your blood is checked, things along those lines. This is another example of a drug that works and we don't fully understand why. We just got a bunch of those. And so lithium is a metallic element naturally occurring as mineral salt. And it is extraordinarily effective in treating bipolar disorder and mania specifically. Determining the dosage for a given patient can be really delicate. So if it's too low, it's not actually going to help. But again, too high, you can get that lithium poisoning or lithium intoxication. There are these newer medications as well. Very similar to the fact that we're finding some treatments that work for epilepsy, work for depression. Anticonvulsant medications also seem to work as mood stabilizers. So things like Tegretol and Depakote. Around 1/3 of all people with bipolar disorder seek treatment in a given year, and another 15% are monitored by family physicians. More than 60% of people who have manic episodes improve with these medications. And you experience fewer new episodes while on the medication. Mood stabilizers also seem to be prophylactic in that they can prevent future symptoms from developing. They also help those with bipolar disorder overcome their depressive episodes to a lesser degree. Let me just say a little bit more about the drug. This is mostly what we do for people with bipolar disorder. So again, we don't fully understand why these mood stabilizing drugs work the way they do. We just know that they do, and that's great. They suspect that drugs change synaptic activity in the neurons, but in a different way than like the reuptake inhibitors. Although antidepressant drugs affect a neuron's initial reception on neurotransmitter, mood stabilize effect seems to affect the neuron's secondary messengers. These drugs also increase the production of neuroprotective proteins, which may decrease the symptoms of bipolar disorder. Another theory here is that mood stabilizers correct bipolar functioning by directly changing sodium and potassium ion activity in neurons, which if you remember back to intro psych, like 101, or if you've taken biopsych, that's how the electrical activity goes down the axon of the neuron itself. So certainly if that is more efficient, you can see how that would be helpful. Yeah. Good question. Yes. So particularly if you are given too much of anything, your dosage isn't right. Medications can actually, antidepressant medications can actually flip you manic or make your manic episodes happen more often. And I saw this happen, unfortunately, when I was in college. We only had one physician on campus because we were in the middle of nowhere. And he was an OBGYN by training. He wasn't a psychiatrist by training. So it didn't mean he couldn't prescribe these medications. It just meant he didn't tend to do it well. And two of my friends actually went manic when he gave them too high of doses. One of them I witnessed, like my parents were in town. They were like, let's go to dinner. We're sitting at dinner and she just stares out the window. And it looks like that. It looks like beautiful day, but nothing out there, right? And she goes, animals. There's not even a squirrel or a bird. And, and just sort of like talking in her own way. The other example I can think of is one of my friends had a client who underwent bariatric surgery. And they didn't, after the surgery, the surgeons and her doctors didn't titrate her antidepressants well, and she flipped manic. And she actually had to be inpatient hospitalized because this was like days after her bariatric surgery. But if you don't know, you lose weight quickly, but not immediately. And she was walking around naked in the unit and being like, look at my new body. Because in her mind, she was already thin. So yeah, it certainly can happen. So this is why I always say, if you're going to be on, psychotropic drugs, see a psychiatrist who knows what they're doing, if you can. I know that it doesn't exist everywhere, right? Clearly, I saw that in college. And it's actually one of the reasons why I used to be afraid, as much as I endorsed them for my clients, of antidepressant medications, because I didn't want to flip a panic. But, again, you get someone who knows what they're doing, you're safe. So therapy in bipolar disorder can take on any of the modalities, what we've talked about. But the biggest thing it's going to focus on is medication management. As you can imagine, if someone does get into a manic episode, a lot of times they feel like, I feel great. Why do I need to take my medication? and then it gets worse. And then they disappear from therapy for months. So a lot of what you do is like motivational interviewing, trying to get people to really understand why they should be into taking their meds consistently, even when they feel good. Few controlled studies have tested the effectiveness of adjunctive therapy, mostly because this is a lot less common than depression. So again, depression is about 12 to 16% of the population, bipolar is like 1 to 3%. So there are fewer people to test it on. But growing research suggests that it helps therapy, in addition to medication, helps to reduce hospitalization, improve social functioning, and increases the client's ability to obtain and hold a job, which is really important for some people to get a rhythm of their life. Alrighty. So on Tuesday, we will be talking about suicide. I know that's a difficult topic for people, so I just want to give you all the heads up. It's honestly a difficult topic for me. So we'll see how I do. Last time I cried, so, you know, we'll just go and see what happens. Everybody have a great weekend. Enjoy the weather until it turns into the 40s on Saturday again.